Hi YouTube. So this is one of many videos I'm going to upload post our convention. This one, you've probably seen the latter half or parts of it. The interview, I was actually in the right place at the right time and caught the whole thing. It's the whole interview. The very beginning, the only dialogue you're missing is where the Muslim guys approach PZ and said to him very abruptly, Professor Mars, why do you hate Muslims? To which he retorted that I don't hate Muslims. And I think I started recording from then. So there we are, enjoy.
I think we have a lot of good reasons to believe the intellectual foundation sounds very, very strong.
No, they're not.
Okay, why? Why not?
It relies on this profit.
Okay, what's wrong with our problem?
How do you know?
Did he even exist? Okay, let me give you some evidence.
I read this book last night.
How do you find it?
Terrible.
Okay.
This is disgraceful.
Give me some contention.
You clearly have some money here because you can put up these nicely printed booklets. But
we have money. You have a very nice suit on.
Oh yeah. So what I'm saying is you've got some money. You're investing money in this, and then you've got this crap. This is rehashed creationist nonsense. This is the same stuff we've been dealing with in the United States for the last 50 years.
Okay.
And there's absolutely nothing in here that's original.
Okay. And
all of it's been frequently refuted. So.
But what we've just made are statements and generalizations. You haven't given any substantive. What do you mean? I mean, do you disagree that, for example, when we talk about?
Well, you make the first cause argument.
No, we don't actually. It's actually called the Kalam cosmological argument. It's a rehashed version, it's a modern version that has good premises and if you study logic. Okay, let me give it to you very in summary, right?
Okay, give me the summary.
There's two premises here. Whatever begins to exist is a cause. The second premise is the universe began to exist. Okay, and we could substantiate that philosophically and using astrophysics. Then the conclusion, which makes it a sound and valid argument, is that then the universe has a cause. So if the universe began to exist, it has a cause. So let me just repeat that.
Okay.
One, whatever begins to exist is a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe is a cause. It doesn't mean it's God though. But we use conceptual analysis.
That's right. I'll point out two things there.
Good.
And one is that modern physics does not support your claims.
Okay.
And you can have spontaneous things just popping into existence, and they do all the time.
Okay. Can I address that?
Well, first, and let me make my other point, which is that. As you mentioned, pointing out that there was a cause does not imply a God.
I agree.
So why do we care?
You didn't let me finish.
Okay, now you're going to finish.
Okay, good. So first thing, in terms of random quantum fluctuations and subatomic events that don't correspond to causality, well, that's a particular view amongst physicists, which is an indeterministic view. We don't have to hold that view. You know, the mathematics is there, but there could be different translations in the real world. So for instance, you could take a deterministic view, which is the David Bowie interpretation, for instance, right? And there's other physicists who are taking that view. So you can't just say it's all of physics. And I think that's a bit of a scientific outdated cliche.
But then what you're doing is you're admitting that you're basically cherry picking the.
No, we're not, because.
Well, yes, you are. You just said that.
No, no. let me tell you why. Because if you take a Kantian argument that causality is a priori, it's independent from experience. Because we only know that we can order our perceptions in the universe based upon the innate concept of causality. So to accept that there's no causality in the quantum fluctuations would be denying your own very perceptions in the first place. So we have good reasons to believe that there's causality here, and quantum fluctuations don't say much. And the other point I'm trying to make is when we know there's a cause for the universe, which you're happily assuming that there may be a cause, the problem is that now when you use conceptual analysis, you come to some starting conclusions. For example, we would argue that Occam's razor must be uncaused. We would argue that therefore it must be eternal. We would argue that it's immaterial and transcendent because it creates the material world. So from these perspectives, it's in line with the monotheistic view of God. I don't see that as a problem.
I see that as a huge problem.
Why?
Because what you've got is an anthropomorphic patriarchal God.
No, we haven't said anything about anthropomorphism.
Yes, you have.
That's a Christian narrative.
This is the Islamic narrative too.
No, in the Quran it says "Laysa kamithli shay," which means God is transcendent. There is nothing like unto Him. And when we say Him, is no gender.
So what?
But do you see how some of your outdated cliches you can't apply them to the Quran?
You've got a personal God who takes a personal interest in human beings.
Okay, what's wrong with that?
You have no evidence for this. The universe.
Can I give you evidence for God having a will? Okay, an eternal being, bringing to existence a finite effect, must have chosen it to come to existence. Choice indicates a will, and a will indicates it can have a relationship with personal beings, you see.
Where's the evidence? Yeah.
Conceptually, so conceptual.
Oh, conceptual.
Okay.
But you see,
You know why that's
I
so
think
funny?
everybody here can see what you're
Is
doing.
it doctor or professor?
Everybody here can see what you're
Professor
doing.
Myers, you know why that's funny? Because you're assuming that you must have an empirical paradigm to everything that you say, verificationism. It's like logical positivism of the 1960s. It doesn't work anymore. I'll give you an example, because empiricism can't even prove logical truths like numbers. Numbers are conceptual. They're necessary truths.
Science
so
is
we
not
can't
about
laugh
truth.
that there's no physical evidence for numbers. You see the point? Do you understand the point here?
I wonder if I can get in a few words.
Yeah, sure,
there.
go for it, sir.
We'll see how far I get. I think everybody here can see exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, that's fine.
So what I do is mention something and you immediately interrupt and you give me this
No, I just want to
long-
address it. That's what's I want to
Let him finish!
Case proven.
Okay, go for it.
And then you immediately interrupt and you throw out this long series of philosophical gaffe, which is completely irrelevant to your premise. I don't care about this philosophy, okay? Philosophy is a useful tool for generating good questions, but then science is what answers them. Science does not meddle in proofs. So when you keep talking about proofs, you're just going right over my head. I don't care. Proofs don't matter. What matters is, do we have empirical evidence for anything that you're talking about? And we do not. And in fact, we have empirical evidence that defies these interpretations that you're throwing at us.
Can I address that?
Why? Sure.
Thank you. First and foremost, don't you think it's an unhealthy way intellectually to always require empirical evidence to form conclusions about things? Because that would go back to logical positivism. It's very crude. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I would not agree.
Okay, why not?
Because you need the empirical evidence in order to confirm your interpretations of the world. That what we do in science is that you make preliminary hypotheses, which of course are conceptual.
Sure.
But then you rely on the fact that you have to generate empirical evidence about the world around you in order to test them. When you talk constantly about this conceptual stuff, this philosophical stuff, what you're doing is charging off without anything to ground your conclusions.
Okay. Because I think there's a hidden assumption here that the only way you should ground conclusions are empirically. And I agree there's a value for empiricism.
No, that's not true.
But I would argue that there's some logical truths, for instance, that are necessary before you even have empiricism, do you see? This is why when there was the big rationalist debate, the rationalists were the empiricists, mathematics was the battleground, wasn't it? And this is why you have some empiricists are rationalists for mathematics, but when it comes to the world, the empiricists. That's how they reconciled it. There was a philosophical contradiction there. So it's useful we're having this discussion, but I think there is that, I think, crude view of that empiricism is the only way formed to conclude about it.
No. This isn't about absolutes. This is not about. Not that I'm saying that there's only one true way to interpret the world.
Sure.
What this is saying that the one reliable method we have requires confirmation from empiricism.
Okay.
You have not demonstrated another reliable method, because there are lots of people who believe in different religious views. They are all sitting there making exactly the same kinds of arguments you do. The Christians make the very same arguments you do.
Yes, they do, of course.
Yes.
Some Christians. Not all.
Most
Some
of them.
Muslims just have faith or just
Whatever.
blindly believe whatever.
But the point is that you are both using the same methods and you are arriving at completely different conclusions.
Yeah, I agree. Can I tell you why I agree with you?
Okay, go ahead.
The reason I agree with you is because, see, we've got one aspect of the philosophical justification for the existence of a creator cause, whatever you call it. Now from that, then you have the concept of revelation, the concept of text that is claimed to be from the divine. Now, we would humbly argue that, the Quran, which is the book of the Muslims, we would say is a very intrusive text. It's an imposing text, right? But this imposition, we would argue, is positive because, frankly, I think it just makes you think. For example, the Quran says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not use your brains? يَتَفَكِّرُونَ, for those who reflect, deep reflection. The Arabic word here means to really reflect about the implications of something. But the Quran goes further than this, which is quite weird from a religious book, from a secular perspective. It actually says, if you don't believe it's from the divine or from the supernatural, then challenge it. So what we would argue humbly is that there are no naturalistic explanations for certain statements in the Quran. For instance, some statements in the Quran that they mention geology and concept of isostasy, for instance. Concepts of that the mountains have like root-like structures, which we just found out recently. If you go to the book Earth by Dr. Frank Press, it concludes that. So how could a desert Arab who knew nothing about science, who was so primitive, that for instance, they used to believe mountains to keep the sky out, would come to such conclusions? We would humbly argue philosophically, we exhaust naturalistic explanation, so it's a signpost to the transcendent. Do you appreciate that?
No. I've read these same interpretations.
Okay.
In particular, the ones I'm really interested in, because I'm a developmental biologist,
Sure.
like Keith Moore's nonsense, total bullshit that he talks about.
You disagree with Keith Moore?
Why is that
Oh,
nonsense?
yes.
Why is that nonsense?
I've read those sections of the Quran.
Do you disagree with the stages of embryology? The Quran, you know, the
Yes.
seventh.
Yes,
So you-
Let him say why, let him
the
say why.
Quran
Right.
is babbling. It's throwing out these very
Sure.
vague, fuzzy descriptions that, you know, of the embryo looking like chewed flesh or whatever.
Oh no,
And-
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
That's what I'm talking about.
No, I'm talking about specific stages of embryology. For example, the bones are formed first. That's what Dr. Keith Moore was talking about.
Yes.
7th week, and then
We have-
the muscles are
Yes, we
formed
have.
in the 8th
We
week.
have a series of very well described, very thoroughly analyzed steps in the development of the embryo.
Right.
And if you go to any embryology text, they will lay them out for you.
Right.
You cannot substitute the Quran for that. When you look at what the Quran says about it, it is vague, it is ambiguous.
Sure.
It's the kind of stuff that a desert nomad might guess about what's going on.
I mean, I would disagree. I mean, wouldn't be able to guess the formation of the bones in the 7th week
Yes.
straight after. The word
Yes.
is summa in Arabic, straight after.
Immediately.
And
So
that's-
when we do scratch the surface rather than have a superficial
But
understanding,
again,
I think we'll get it better, right?
this is again something where the Quran is basically stealing from Greek embryology.
Galen, yeah.
Well, I'm talking specifically about Aristotle, who
Okay.
made these
Well,
observations.
Aristotle's embryology, if you study it, I mean, I'm sure you've studied it.
Yes.
He believed that fetus is formed by the mixture of menstrual blood and semen.
Correct.
Well, Quran doesn't make any statement like that. And on top of it, even if we go further to Galen had
No, but-
many stages of embryology, and the Quran doesn't have any of those things.
My
Yeah.
point is that there's very little about embryology in the Quran.
You-
What there is.
Details are not there. You're right. Yeah,
That's
the
right.
details are not
and
there.
what
yes.
what details are there
Yeah.
are obviously cribbed from Aristotle.
No,
Yes.
not at all.
You can't make that
Not at all.
link. The reason you can't make that link is because
Which particular?
you would have to assume that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, would have known what was right, taken it, and then threw away what was wrong. I mean, that's a big assumption. You're claiming supernatural here.
What I would say is that Muhammad was a man of his times, that he was consulting with scholars at the time, that these were ideas that were current
the
and
empirical evidence?
But there's no empirical or historical
Evidence for that. There isn't.
But it's just an assumption.
But
That's faith.
No,
I have faith that the Prophet Muhammad borrowed things from scholars.
yes.
That's faith. A man of faith, ladies and gentlemen.
That is a reasonable assumption.
No, how can
The
it be?
alternative is to assume
But the
that
history is counter to that. The history is counter to that. You see?
you're saying that Muhammad was some kind of ignoramus living in a cave for all of his life?
No, what I'm
Not
saying
at all.
was, even if your assumption was true, it would still be incorrect because the scholars of science at the time had no idea. They had absolutely no idea what was going on with the science. They thought that mountains were keeping the sky up.
And that's not true either.
Exactly. But this is why
No, that's not true what you're saying about the scholars of the time.
No, in Arabia, definitely that was the case.
No, and in fact, there were no scholars in Arabia. In his city, there were only 17 people who could read and write. Forget the sciences and the complicated knowledge of scriptures. There were only 17 people in his entire tribe who could read and write.
I'm just kind of surprised that your argument rests on the fact that you're arguing that Arabs were ignorant nomads who knew nothing at all.
Yes, this is what we said. Yes. There were people who
But so was
killed
many
their daughters.
Europeans at that time as
Yes.
well. I mean, a lot
But
of people.
I think the historical evidence shows that there's much more trade and communication going on than you are giving people credit
Well,
for.
you can be ignorant and do trade. I mean, we have
Yes.
people doing trade today who are ignorant.
And
Look at the bankers today, man, what they've done to us.
And that's
They've
trade.
kept all our money.
And with trade comes information. Like I say, when we look at the descriptions of embryology in the Quran, and we look at the descriptions of embryology in Aristotle,
Sure.
they're the same.
Well, in what way, sir? Would you like to give us?
No, I just think they're the same.
The discussion of the development of bones, etc., all these things, the fairly crude stages that are described in Aristotle, it's obvious.
They have a point there. I'm willing to accept that. What I'm saying is, I'm willing to accept that there may be similarities, not that Quran borrowed from Aristotle. My contention is that the specific stages described in the Quran, how does that match with what Aristotle said? those stages are quite peculiar to the Quran. Quran is quite unique in describing those stages because the bones are formed first and then the muscles, and this is how would a desert nomad know that?
Right now I'm laughing at this idea that this is a specific description of embryology. Yes, bones develop first, then muscles.
I agree, it's general. No, I agree with you, it's
do.
general.
This is something that you can infer just by rational thought about embryology. You can also just determine this by looking at fetuses from different animals. You can look
By
at
desecration.
Yes.
Why don't we get something more specific? I talked about geology, right? And how could it fathom? How could anyone illiterate, where the science was counter to that time, right? How could you?
This is something counter to say that mountains have roots is.
And they have a function that we
What they
understand
do,
that
forget
is in line with isostasy according to geologists today. That to me is quite phenomenal.
But once again, you've equated these really crude, primitive guesses that you find in the Quran with the specific details of science.
Okay, let me tell you why they're not crude. The reason not crude is that the Quranic science, and this would be good for everyone to listen, is that we have the Quran is probably the only religious book that gives you the tools to interpret it, right? So what the Quran says is you take general principles in the Quran, general values or general statements, and you refer them to specific ones related to the same topic. So in normal literature and linguistics, it's called inter and intratextuality, okay? So when we take general statements, we can make them specific with the Arabic language used in the Quran itself. So it's not crude from that perspective, and we have a scope of interpretation, because if the classical Arabic dictionaries were preserved, and we have a scope of meaning. So when we have the scope of meaning, we know that these things are quite specific. Significantly, even when the Quran says that the universe is expanding, for example, there's the word here, expanding, which actually means expanding in the past or expanding in the future. There is a scope of interpretation, do you see? So the interesting thing is, we should maybe...
It's not interesting. You're really boring. This is the same...
Is that an atheist cop-out, maybe?
No, this is the same story we get from Jewish scholars, from Christian scholars. They do exactly the same thing.
Well, I'm not Jewish or Christian, I'm Muslim, and we're talking about specific issues.
It's standard religious analysis.
Yeah, but Professor Myers, wouldn't you think it would be highly arrogant of me if I said to you, what you're saying is typical atheists, what they say, they change the subject, they go to history and they say that you're the same as the Jews, you're the same as the Christians, and throw all these outdated cliches. Would you appreciate me doing that?
Go ahead.
But I wouldn't. Do you know why? Do you know why I wouldn't do that? Because I really want to engage with you. I really want to engage with you, that's why.
But no, you do not.
Of course I do.
You want to parrot dogma at me and have me accept it.
I'm actually accepting a lot of your assumptions and premises. I don't have a problem with that.
Well, you did also try to assert and project faith onto him.
Yes.
And
well, he said it was an assumption, that's why.
Okay, and you can make an assumption based on evidence. Faith
but he said he had no evidence.
Based on no evidence.
No, well, we've been talking quite
I do have
evidentially
evidence.
here.
That's what I'm telling you. That for instance, when we look at Aristotle's words, when we look at the description of the Quran, we see a correspondence.
Well, you haven't shown us any correspondence.
Yeah, that's the point. That's just a statement.
You haven't shown us. This is a statement. Aristotle is like the Quran. How?
I'm like Einstein,
Aristotle also describes the emergence of bones and muscle in sequence.
Right.
Okay.
And it's like the Quran.
And it's like the Quran.
Does Aristotle say the bones come first and then the flesh and the muscles? Does he say that? Are you sure?
Anybody that works.
I'll let you think about this.
Well,
anyone that works
I'm not saying it. Can you are you sure?
Is that what the Quran specifically says?
Absolutely. This is exactly what the Quran says. Chapter 23.
Because you just demonstrated the Quran is wrong.
Yeah, but Professor Myers.
That's not what happens.
Well, this is what the embryologists are telling us. This is exactly what the embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not. Embryologists.
Let me tell you what Keith Moore said. I mean, you can disagree with him.
He doesn't like Keith Moore.
I don't know why you don't. What he said on the page number 364A of his book, The Human Embryo, that in the 7th week the bones are formed, and immediately after that the flesh is formed, and the bones are clothed with flesh. Keith Moore is wrong. He's an embryologist. This is his field.
It's my field too. I know he's wrong.
You're an embryologist?
Yes.
Oh, great! Wow, that's news to me. Okay.
So that's wrong, because what happens first is you have differentiation of mesoderm.
Right.
That within the mesoderm you have segregation into things like embryonic mesenchyme, and then you have these cartilaginous centers will form bone. Right. And these are forming simultaneously with each other.
Right. Simultaneously.
Yes.
Even if that's the case, the Quran is right, because thumma is very, even if that's the case, linguistically the Quran is right. Thumma literally can in Arabic language means is things happening simultaneously.
Parallel as well.
Yes.
But that's
parallel.
besides the point.
I have a question
So wait,
for you.
let me read it. Professor Myers, I think what's interesting, even if you're right, that means we would have to assume that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, actually used to go and look into biology. He was a biologist. He would actually go and investigate things about
He was an
mountains.
astronomer?
He must have had a library of an Alexandrian magnitude. So even when you make these assumptions, it's still problematic.
He was a geologist?
No, because this is what I've been telling you.
Sure.
There are no embryological details of any consequence in the Quran.
Well,
This is not stuff.
the details are not there. You're right. You're right.
This
the
is not
details are
stuff
not
that
there.
requires a huge library to figure out. This requires a passing acquaintance with general knowledge about the primitive state of biology at the time.
That's a fair point. Are you willing to accept now that Muhammad possibly had general knowledge about astronomy, hieroglyphics? He had knowledge of, for example, geology.
Yep.
He's talking about isostasis, something about isostasis. Okay, so he must have been going around studying with some scholars in Arabia. He wasn't a shepherd. He was a very literate man.
The intellectual
He was
of the time.
teaching in a university. He was an intellect, and all those people who believed in it at the time, there must have been blind bunch of bigots, and they just followed him just for the sake of it, just to have a drink.
No, I've been saying quite the opposite. I'm saying that he's a man of his times, that he was part of a culture,
Right.
that the Arabs of that time were not quite as primitive and dogmatic and ignorant as you seem
Well,
to
it
think.
depends what books you're reading, sir, because this is my
I'm saying they had.
I'm a historian from the University of London, and I'll refer you to the books of Irfan Shahid, who's an authority in this field, pre-Islamic Arabia, and he states that Arabs at the time were a primitive society.
Yes.
And now you're saying yes.
Well, no, I agree. They were.
They were primitive in the sense they were not.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
There was no Arabic language
that you-
written down at the time.
On the one hand, you are complaining that there was this detailed, wonderful science in the Quran
Yes.
that he could only have learned from, revelation.
Sure.
And I'm saying that no, that what we find in the Quran is an extremely primitive science. There was nothing more than the common man could have learned from, general interactions with learning society at the time.
Like mountain roots as well. How would they even know that? It was not even knowledge at that time.
Mountain roots. What do we do again? It's all it's saying is that you've got this mountain that's going up here, and there's a lot of depth beneath it.
And then they would understand the function of that as well.
The function.
Yes,
The function of the Quran
It
is
is,
to
absolutely.
anchor the crust and things, and that's not the case. That's again wrong.
It's not to
geology.
anchor the crust at all.
What is it for?
It's actually to, from my knowledge, it's actually to, like Archimedes' fulcrum point. Like that's what isostasis comes from. It's like another term to discuss the Archimedes' fulcrum point, and that's what it's there for.
I think the really sad thing here is you're missing the enormous picture to focus on the pixel.
Yes.
Right.
Okay? The enormous picture is that you have something that only communicates with the least credible possible proponent. And he wants you to believe impossible nonsense for no reason. And only if you believe impossible nonsense for no reason will you be saved. And you will get unimaginable rewards if you believe whatever the priests are selling. And you will suffer a fate worse than death if you don't buy into their nonsense.
That's not true. That's quite a sexy way of looking at it, I think.
A sexy way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, well,
There's a language barrier here.
You're all about the sexy way.
no, you sexed it up slightly, right? Because actually, what Professor, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
But
Professor Myers. What I discussed with Professor Myers was like actually the Quran is quite opposite to that. It's not a text that says believe just because I say so.
Okay, then
it actually
why-
tells you to, for example, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. In Arabic it says, do you not use your mind, your intellect? So
Then let me
it's
clarify.
telling you and trying to evoke thinking. You see?
I just want to make sure we don't have a language barrier. So when I said that you are punished for not believing, you're saying that I'm wrong. That in your religion you are not punished simply for not believing.
No, you're right, but it's bigger than that. It's an
It's
existential
bigger than
question.
so I was right.
No,
Okay,
well-
what else am I wrong about?
Well, I think the way we connect with each other is not by having yes or no answers, but having a conversation, right? So
Are you-
It's an existential question. For example, see,
Hold on just a second. I want you to think for a moment about the creator of the entire universe.
Yeah.
Doesn't give a rat's ass whether you do anything good or bad in your life. All that matters, the sole criteria, is that you are gullible enough to follow the story of the least credible illiterate proponent you can follow. That's the sole criteria, and that's all.
No, that's not true.
Okay,
There's
if
two
that's
things.
not it,
Can I
then an
explain to you?
unbeliever could be saved. An unbeliever would not go to
Yeah,
hell.
that's true.
If all unbelievers go to hell, then the sole criteria is gullibility.
Let me give you an example. First and foremost, what we say is that the Quran says we do not punish anyone until they have given the message. And there is another concept in the Quran called Dalil Burhan, which means conclusive evidence that you require to be conclusive. Now the second thing is, because the message is good for you, that's why. And we've seen that in history. So no,
Now I can't.
Thank you.
well, maybe, no, there's another point.
Let's not get
One
stampeded
second,
in.
one second.
Just one at a time,
Yeah,
please.
no stampedes, okay? The other point is an existential question, because we believe in Islam of this philosophical principle called the fitra. Fitra means the innate disposition. And we believe that human beings have been created with the innate disposition to acknowledge oneness. Okay, it's a spiritual concept, the oneness of God. And what we say is, when we deny ourselves, that's why the question who you are is an existential question in the Quran. Saying, who are you? Are you just a product of American society? Are you a product of capitalism? Are you a product of communism? Are you a product of the system? Are you a product of your parents? If you are, then who are you? You're just like a social biological robot that someone types in the code and you just act in accordance. And the Quran says, don't do that. Think about your reality. And it says, are you just going to follow your forefathers? And it says, literally, even if they were based on no knowledge, it's an existential question. And from that we say, if you don't know who you are, then you're just rejecting yourself. And God says in the Quran that to deny God or to reject God from that innate disposition perspective is like denying your own self.
Okay.
So the point I'm trying to say is it is an existential question. And that's why it's useful to always have this kind of good discussions all the time.
Okay. My primary interest is in phylogenetics. So when I go to deny myself, I would have to deny that I am an evolved ape. That's what I am. That's what we all are.
Okay.
The Quran, so far as I know, in denying evolution, denies itself. And you are telling me that what I have to instead adopt...
It doesn't deny
is
all principles.
The Quran doesn't talk about evolution.
regardless. What you're telling me, it talks about Adam and Eve and all of this, and the great flood that we know didn't happen and all of that. But apart from all that, you're asking me to accept this uber-galactic super being.
Well, the Quran doesn't talk about the great flood either.
Okay. Okay. Just to clarify, the important point is you're asking me to accept this uber-galactic super being, of which we have no evidence at all, from a system of religion which has so far only produced failure in every predictable sense. And you want me to believe that this thing will punish me simply for not believing, and it wants me to believe the least credible people and the most improbable stories, and I'll be punished if I don't. How is that not a criteria of gullibility?
Well, there's two assumptions here. First and foremost, there's this galactic being that doesn't exist. I would deny that. I think there's very good reasons to believe that a divine exists. I could articulate them for you.
I would love to see
You can read this book. You'll discover it's bullshit. All the way through.
Professor Myers, because we really want to listen to Miriam Namazi because she has outdated clues about the Sharia, right? Especially when she talks about rape using four witnesses. That's nowhere in the Sharia. That's not at all. Testimony is
the
enough.
booklet, I just read a booklet.
It's a joke.
It's
But
a
anyway,
joke.
we'll listen to that. The thing is, if we pay for your ticket to come down to London, would you have an intellectual dialogue with us with a non-Muslim coordinator?
An intellectual dialogue with you about what?
Or what we've been just doing so far? Would you do that?
I'll be around. You might
I'll
be
tell you
able
what,
to. Yeah.
I'll give you a forum.
Cool.
Okay? We'll book you on the Magic Sandwich Show.
What is that?
Magic Sandwich Show.
Yeah, we'll
What
have
do
you
you
on the
think of
Magic
that?
Sandwich.
Is that a real show?
Yeah, it's a real show.
Can I get a sandwich?
And if you do, it'll cure you of cancer.
Only if it's halal meat, right?
Certainly.
So, anyway, good to see you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The show goes on.